Today's guest is Brady Holmer, a PhD candidate in applied physiology at the University of Florida. He holds a bachelor's of science in exercise science from Northern Kentucky University. His research is focused on the effects of exercise and sleep on cardiovascular health and function in humans. Brady ran Division I cross country and track for Northern Kentucky University. Last spring, Brady designed a 5K training plan that helped me improve my per mile pace from 9:31 to 8:01. In this interview, which is sponsored by Simply Snackin', the makers of high protein beef and chicken snacks, which are incidentally delicious, Brady provides great information for anyone interested in improving their distance running abilities, particularly anyone considering running their first half marathon. I'll be running my first half marathon on October 9th, 2022 in Rhinebeck, New York. Let's get down to this interview with Brady. I already can see the interest in the running community, especially among people that maybe have some similarities to me, both men and women who are intimidated, don't know where to start. It's really helpful to be able to talk to people like you, not only who have an excellent knowledge of running, but also you have a huge amount of knowledge in physics. Your PhD is in
applied physiology.
Okay, so and clearly you have an understanding of how to convey information in ways that's got balance and nuance, because there's a lot of harm done unintentionally when people get a little bit of knowledge.
I do definitely think you're right in terms of running and training is the same as nutrition in that people want, and this is what I try not to do. I obviously have my personal biases about both nutrition and endurance training, but there are so many approaches to it all. And so I think the problem is when people pretend like their answer is the only answer, or, you have to follow this or that, there are so many nuances and so many ways to approach things that and that's what will try to convey, in some of my answers today. It's look, yeah, I'm going to tell you a strategy that you can use to train for your half marathon, but by no means is this the only way. I'm not the sole authority on this. And everybody's so individual. So there are lots of different approaches. And I think just having general frameworks versus saying of course we'll get into this, but you asked, it's run 30 miles a week, no more, no less. It's okay, well, that's not going to work. You need to have a framework for people to work into that will lead them to success. And there are multiple avenues to that. So, for sure. It's a crazy space and a lot of information out there.
Why don't you start off by if somebody came to you and said, hey, Brady, I'm interested in running a half marathon. I'm in, my doctor says I'm in reasonably good shape, or I may be a little out of shape, but there's not a health issue with me trying to improve my cardiovascular condition. So we're working with the knowledge that the person is relatively healthy. What's realistic for we'll start off with someone like me, mid to late 50s, and never run this kind of distance before. Number one, can I do it? And how much time should it take before I am ready to try to do it? And what should I do in the time frame that I have? And in this case, I have signed up for a half marathon, October 9th. October in New York will be nice weather, some hills. It's something that I feel is reasonable, but I want your thoughts.
Yeah, sure. So I guess, we can almost use your kind of race as a framework maybe in talking about this, but, so you have 5, and I'm sure at the time when you signed up, maybe at least more than 6 months or so to train for the race, which in my opinion is definitely plenty of time to sort of build yourself up to get in half marathon shape. So to answer your first question, yes, anyone can do it, and I do believe that regardless of sort of baseline fitness level, obviously you want to be healthy enough to start running, but anybody can run and complete a half marathon or a marathon if that's eventually your goal. But so starting out, I think that there is probably a bare minimum of running that you want to be able to devote yourself to doing during the week. And I can, provide maybe a range that I think for a half marathon would probably be ideal. I would say that in terms of the frequency that someone wants to be running, if they're, say, taking the most extreme case, a quote couch to half marathon, so maybe you've never even run before, I would say 3 days a week, kind of bare minimum. A half marathon it's not 26 miles, but 13 miles isn't it's a pretty decent distance. So 3 days per week, I would say minimum. And then in terms of mileage, somewhere around maybe 25 to 35 miles. And then your pace per mile will obviously dictate how much time somebody's going to be spending running. So anywhere from 2 to 5 hours per week. And I think that range sort of allows most people. I think most people have 2 hours per week to, say, devote to running, at the bare minimum. And then, some people might have 5, and then I'm not going to put a cap, on how much somebody might want to train. I think going maybe above 5 hours for a first half marathon might be a little extreme. You don't want to get injured or burn yourself out. So, but those 3 days a week, that's going to be enough of a stimulus, that you're going to be able to, adapt to the training and, actually see results and get better for this half marathon. 2 days per week, just in my opinion, wouldn't be enough. And that's kind of rooted in science, both resistance and endurance training. You kind of need at least 3 days a week to repeat that stimulus so your body can adapt to that. But I definitely think 25 to 35 miles of running, that 2 to 5 hours is going to sort of be your bare minimum. And then, if someone had more time to devote to it, somewhere like 5 days per week, maybe 40-ish to 45, maybe even 50 miles per week. That could kind of be ideal. And I almost think that even though that seems like a lot, that's still in a reasonable kind of a reasonable range for someone to accomplish. Now, that would obviously be towards the end, maybe, of their training program. So a few months in, you're going to be working up to that. You're not going to start at 5 days per week, 40 to 45 miles. So I would suggest start at 3 days per week, integrate a couple more running days, maybe after your maybe 4 or 5 months into your plan. And this depends on obviously how far you are away from race day, but sort of obviously, work up. But I think those are kind of the good ranges that somebody should look to shoot for if they were going to try to accomplish a race of that distance.
Okay, excellent. Very, very helpful. And I appreciate that thought about working your way up to it. So, it would probably be a lot for me to devote 5 days a week for 5 months. But if I was doing it with the mindset of getting in better and better shape in June, July, August, and then like sort of going up, in the month or two prior to the race, that would probably work better into my life schedule, and probably other people could probably relate to that.
For sure. And then as the race gets closer, you're going to decrease that volume a little bit just going into the race, so you're feeling a bit fresh. And then one more thing kind of that I wanted to note, just in terms of thinking about that weekly framework, the 3 days per week is important in kind of the frequency at which you run. But what's going to be most important, especially for something like a half marathon, is sort of that weekly long run. When you're training for an endurance race, you typically will have maybe a workout during the week, a faster workout, and this might not even be necessary for a first-time half marathoner. Maybe you don't need to work on speed work. So 2 kind of sort of shorter or medium runs during the week, and then typically a weekend is devoted to a long run, where you're probably going to get maybe, say, a third or half of your weekly mileage just within that run. So if somebody were doing 25 to, say, 25 miles per week, they might do, say, a 6-mile run during the week, maybe a 7 or 8 mile run, and then do, say, a 10-mile run or something like that, 10 to 12 during the weekend. And that long run is going to be probably the most important run in the training plan. So overall volume in the week matters, but that long run is really important because you need to train your aerobic system and your musculoskeletal system just to be able to handle that time on your feet. You're going to be out there on the half marathon course anywhere between an hour and a half to 3+ hours. So you just want to make sure you are actually able to run for that long. So that long run is going to be one of the key kind of pieces in that puzzle of someone's training plan.
Is there any equipment, gadgets, apps, or anything else that you think are essential for someone to have starting out, to monitor their heart, to monitor their pace, anything like that?
Yeah. So, I think the basic thing that anybody who is going to be at least somewhat serious about running needs is a GPS watch. Now, I'm pretty sure that an iWatch or the Apple Watch has kind of a built-in GPS and can use some of the Apple Health stuff to track a run, and that could be, you know, plenty. Fitbit, maybe some of the more advanced ones might also have, say, distance tracking or something like that. But typically Fitbits are a little less kind of advanced. So there's Apple Watch, but then there are also several brands like Garmin or Coros watches. So there are base models of watches that you can get for $100, $150. So I would really suggest at the bare minimum, invest in a GPS watch that will track your pace and your distance, because you want to know how much you're running per week. You want to know how fast you're running those. There are apps for your phone. If somebody doesn't want to wear a watch, you could download the Strava app, or I think the Strava app in particular, where you can basically log a run in the app. You can start it. It'll use your phone's GPS to log your run. So you can start it, hold your phone, put it in a pack during a run, and it'll get your run. I find that to be inconvenient. I like having something on my wrist, but you know, some people don't want another piece of technology. So I would recommend, if you want to use your phone, do the Strava app, but really consider investing in a at least base model kind of GPS watch that's going to have your basic functions: heart rate, speed, and pace. And I think the heart rate thing as well is, you know, very important to have something that can measure at least your resting heart rate and heart rate during workouts. That will allow you to sort of see how your fitness is improving, both kind of changes in resting heart rate as well as your heart rate, you know, being lower at the same pace as you kind of get better and increase your aerobic fitness. So that's kind of something key, not necessary, but I still think kind of one of the basics that all runners, you know, might need in terms of measuring their training. And then some way to log it. So a lot of the apps that I mentioned earlier, depending on the watch you have, if it's a Coros watch or a Garmin watch, those will have, you know, apps where you can see your training. And then Strava as well seems to be an app that a lot of people are on these days. It's fun. It's sort of like a social media for like fitness. So you can see your friends' workouts. Sometimes that can be helpful. Sometimes that can be hurtful, because you get to see the incredible things everyone's doing. So if you're having an off day, it can kind of decrease your motivation. But, you know, you can give kudos and things like that. Those can be motivational tools for some people. So I find those to also sometimes be helpful.
Do you need a chest heart rate monitor?
So chest heart rate monitors are going to be, in my experience, I think a little more accurate than the wrist worn, although they do validate the wrist worn watches against chest straps and EKG measures of heart rate. So they're fairly valid, but there is some variability to them, you know, plus or minus maybe 5 or so beats per minute during any run. And again, this is my experience, and I'm not, you know, citing like specific studies, even though there are some out there, but, you know, the faster or the harder my run seems to be, the less accurate maybe my heart rate tends to be on those. But I've worn straps and watches at the same time. They seem to sync up pretty well. So I would say, is a heart rate strap necessary? Probably not. But if you want to ensure you're getting the most accurate readings, I would definitely maybe invest in a heart rate strap. They're typically not too expensive.
What I did last year with you was train for a 5K race, and I started around the same time of year and culminated, I think it was in mid-September, and I had a very good experience following the plan that you laid out, and I was running 3 days a week, and I pretty much went the entire Memorial Day to Labor Day. I think I might have missed one workout over that entire time. So there's no question in my mind that when you have a good plan from somebody that knows what they're doing, and then you follow it, you actually do what was requested. For most people, the results are going to be very impressive. You know, I was surprised with how much I was able to accomplish in that time. I would certainly urge anybody who's either listening or reading the results of this interview to consider getting a plan. I know from the plan that I followed last year that you told me to run, slow runs, tempo runs, and you gave some frameworks. Are there going to be things that are based on heart rate in the half marathon training in a plan that you designed?
Yeah, certainly. And so again, it really kind of depends if, say if I were designing a plan for somebody, I would, based on their goals, you know, is kind of going to determine whether we're going to maybe do a weekly very harder, high intensity speed workout. So for somebody first starting off, it's probably just going to be, let's increase your aerobic kind of base fitness as much as we can so you can finish the race and feel strong. So, you know, going up a level from that, then yes, you know, if somebody were to come and say, I want to run a half marathon, but I also want to, you know, really run it pretty like fast and, you know, faster maybe than I think I might be capable of, then I would definitely sort of get into the higher heart rate prescription training kind of during that half marathon. I think I would use heart rate for most people, but again, sometimes it's not necessary, especially maybe for somebody who's doing their first half marathon. And sometimes subjective feelings of this is easy, this is moderate, or this is hard can be just as useful. But again, having sort of that feedback is sometimes helpful to validate you know, how you're feeling. So I would, you know, in a training plan, I would prescribe, you know, somebody to use their heart rate in terms of doing your long runs and your easy runs. Try to stay, you know, between 60 and 70% of like your quote unquote maximal heart rate. And maybe later we'll talk about how you might determine that, or, you know, what are some ways to determine that. And then, you know, I do think once a week though, regardless of if you're going for a time goal, doing a run a little faster than might feel comfortable is important. Something we might call tempo pace or threshold pace. So if we're doing 3 runs per week, one run maybe on Monday, it's just going to be super easy. Go out and run as easy as you kind of want, just really relax and have fun. Then maybe we say Wednesday, and kind of we did this for you on some of your runs. You did more specific workouts, but you know, Wednesday might be, okay, let's push it a little bit today. Let's try to go to say 80, 85% maybe of heart rate, or maybe 80%, something like that. So feel kind of less comfortable than your Monday run. And then on the long run, those are typically going to be, again, easier, just running at a pace that feels comfortable to you. And a good prescription for that would just be like, can I hold a conversation? If you could talk to somebody who is running next to you, and maybe if you're lucky enough to have a running partner, you could actually keep it conversational and actually talk to them. So if you can talk in kind of somewhat complete sentences during a run, you're pretty much in an easy, what some people would maybe call a zone 2 kind of training pace. And then once you start to kind of speak in these more fragmented types of sentences, you know, that's kind of when you can tell the intensity is improving. And it tracks pretty well. So again, one can use a heart rate monitor, but sometimes just these more objective or subjective rather types of measures can help to kind of inform your training intensity.
I was curious about in the process of training, would you be prescribing things like hill work or other race sort of things to get ready for the conditions of a course?
Yeah, certainly. And so this will definitely depend on, you know, you doing some research into what the course looks like. If the course is hillier, then we're maybe going to integrate some more kind of hill type workouts in there. But again, Chris, you know, a hill workout could kind of just be like planning a hilly route on one of your regular runs. You know, you don't have to make a specific, say, hill sprint workout part of your week, but just say, you know, for one, I tend to find it hard to find hills. I currently live in Florida, so you kind of have to seek out the hills around here. But, you know, I'm sure everyone lives in a place at least where say, oh, here's a flatter route if I, you know, go left out of my apartment complex, and the hillier route is if I go right. So like just plan a run and say, I'm going to run a hillier route today versus maybe a flat route on one of my recovery runs. But if somebody was running a really, really hilly course with a lot of sort of elevation gain, then yeah, you could maybe do, say, a weekly workout that would have you, say, running a couple miles to your local steep, long hill, maybe something that takes 1 to 2 minutes to like climb up, and maybe do 10 to 15 sort of accelerations or harder efforts up that hill, jog back down and repeat. That's kind of a basic hill workout that I think everyone can do. Hill workouts are very painful. And, you know, I'm coaching somebody right now, and we have him doing a hill workout per week, even though his goal race is going to be fairly flat. Hills, I heard once, and I don't know who this is attributed to, but a running coach or something, but he said that the hill repeats are sort of like speed training in disguise, because, you know, you're not going to be running fast up a hill, but you're going to be recruiting sort of the same type of muscle fibers. You're going to be getting your heart rate up and sort of really working, you know, you're almost having to use a sprinter-like form when going up a hill, even though you're not running, say, at that fast pace. You're mimicking that fast running without a lot of the impact as well. Maybe just a final point for the last thing. I would suggest, oftentimes multiple people are signing up for races that are, say, out of state, maybe like a destination race. So it's not really possible to, say, go out and run the course beforehand. Most of the courses, if it's kind of a larger, more legit race, maybe we'll have a course map, maybe even an elevation gain chart. Also, something people can do is look up the course that other people have run, say if it's on Strava or computer app like Map My Run, and it will actually show you the elevation gain based on the person who ran it and uploaded that. But regardless of that, I guess this is just to say, research the course you're running, and there's likely some way that you can find where are the hills, what should I know about the course? And ideally, if it's a local race, go out and run it or run half of it, run it as part of your training, something like that. And that will allow you better on race day to know, again, there's no surprises, any course that I ran on, say in college, whenever we would go to a race out of state the day before for our pre-race sort of run, we would just basically go and run the course. It was like an 8K course. We go and run 5 miles. So that way we know exactly what's happening on the course, kind of where you're going to plan maybe your surges or where you're going to take it easy. So it's definitely sort of an invaluable thing to do, to know that course ahead of time. But some people like surprises and novelty. Myself, not so much. I like to know what's coming in a race.
Me too.
Yeah.
Great advice. It's something that a novice like myself wouldn't just necessarily think about. There's so much going on. It's all new, and you overlook one big thing, and it could really mess you up. Do you have any thoughts on let's see, on diet, fueling for a race, fueling for training, and you can include hydration in there? Like, are there any points that a typical person might overlook, or something that you think is important? Because I know that I can handle just about anything for, say, 4 miles, even if there's a lot of heat. I mean, like, your body, there's enough fluid in your body, unless it's like 90 degrees, that, getting back and getting some water, you're okay. At least that's been my experience. But I'm becoming aware, as I've been upping the miles to 7, 8, and I'm going to go past that soon. All of a sudden, you're adding a substantial amount of additional time, and there's probably a lot more that can go wrong, and a lot more. It's a lot more essential to plan for that with what you consume.
Yeah, for sure. I'll touch on hydration first, and then we can maybe talk a little bit about nutrition. So, hydration, again, like nutrition, is kind of a very controversial area, not in terms of should you or should you not hydrate, but it's like how much and do you need to. So yes, in general, I would agree with you, Chris, in that, if you're running anywhere under an hour, unless it's really incredibly humid or incredibly hot, you probably don't need to drink anything. Could you have a couple sips during the run to kind of prevent thirst, or maybe if people get cotton mouth or something like that? Sure, that's fine. But you probably don't need to be carrying, 16 to 20 ounces of water on an hour-long run. You're going to be done in less than an hour, go home, and then you can kind of work on hydrating. I think there's definitely a big difference, though, between, do you need to, or, should you, for kind of optimizing that run or not feeling like absolute crap when you finish, because you can even go out for a 45-minute run. I plan on going on a run later today, probably somewhere 40 to 45 minutes. It's currently, 90 degrees here in Florida. I'm not going to drink anything. I'm going to be pretty, probably miserable when I come back, but I would probably be miserable even if I drank anything, just because it's so hot. So, if you want to finish the run, maybe feeling slightly less than optimal, and you don't want the inconvenience of carrying water or stopping for a water fountain, then you're going to be fine probably anywhere between 45 and 60 minutes. Again, unless it's 100 or so degrees and you didn't hydrate well beforehand. So I think that's kind of one of the key things. Maybe take 8 to 10 ounces of water before you head out for your run. Put some electrolytes in there, some sodium, whatever. That's kind of what I do. And then I just go out on my run, and it's typically fine. I've done, like you mentioned, the body is very capable sort of going on what it's got, and pretty robust. I mean, I've done 18 to 20 mile runs without so much as a sip of water. Again, did I end the run feeling quite as well as I could have if I would have had something to drink? Probably not. But again, the convenience to me just isn't worth it. So that's kind of a factor that comes into play. But again, so if people are, out there running, an hour, hour and a half plus, maybe consider either planning a stop around your run that has a water fountain or something like that, placing a water bottle somewhere on your route, maybe the night before, or just carrying something with you in like a water belt or something. You can get a water pack that has these little kind of handheld water bottles. And you can just stick them in there, carry with you, 12, 16 ounces or something like that. So I would definitely say you need to hydrate, especially during these summer months. You picked a great time to train for half marathon, Chris, during the summer. Yeah, so on hotter runs and things, even when it's cold, you need to drink water, but more so, when your sweat rate is increasing. So yeah, you want to carry something if it's kind of longer, but anything under maybe an hour or so, you may not need to drink, but that's all going to come down to personal preference. And so before I move on to nutrition, was there anything in there that maybe you wanted to expand upon, the hydration type thing? Or?
No, I think that aligns with what I was thinking, and I'm guessing that any sort of a half marathon that's organized by professionals is going to have water stations.
Yes.
And I know that to be the case for the one that I'm registered for. So I think from my past experiences, many years ago, of even running 5Ks and a couple of 10Ks, that there's usually people with cups of water, and so you're not going to die of thirst if you at least are availing yourself of that.
Yeah, for race day, I guess I maybe failed. I was talking, I guess, more in the context of training, but for race day, you want to have something to drink. Since it's going to be, a half marathon. In any race, I mean, I think regardless of how kind of high level or how much you pay to enter the race, they're going to have water stops, at least 2, on the course. Some may have them every 5K. Most have them pretty much every mile. People holding water cups, and sometimes water and Gatorade, depending on the station that you stop at. So those will always have water, so you don't really have to worry about carrying something on race day, which is pretty nice. But I would, suggest during a half marathon, maybe, you don't need to chug a cup of water at every water stop, but every few miles, maybe having a few sips of the water from whatever cup they give you, and then carry on with your race. I think it's just to kind of reduce the sensation of thirst and sort of just maintain hydration. You can get a little dehydrated during the race, and it's not going to affect performance that much. I think that's kind of something that's key to note. A lot of people are afraid to even become a little teeny bit dehydrated, but it's okay, and it's not going to really negatively impact your performance. A common percentage that's often thrown out there is like, once you get, lose 2% of your body weight in water weight, then it starts to decrease performance. I think that just came from sort of like one single paper. So I don't often like to cite that, and I don't really put much stock sort of in that number. There are likely more studies kind of that have shown differing percents, or that 2% doesn't decrease performance. So don't kind of, worry about that, but, you just want to, I think the big thing is preventing yourself from getting thirsty, because something that's interesting, again, I don't know who told me this or what paper or person cited this research, but that 2% rule was thrown out there, and yeah, the subjects decreased their performance when they lost 2% of their body weight, but only if they became thirsty. So if you prevented thirst, for instance, maybe by having them swish around water or something like that in their mouth, if you prevented the thirst from occurring, that performance decrease actually didn't occur. So it was almost the sensation of thirst that kind of caused that decrease in performance, which I just find fascinating. Psychology can be quite powerful, but this isn't to say you shouldn't drink during a race, but definitely just kind of drinking to thirst, I think, is a valid recommendation. And I've, had multiple kind of experts tell me that seems to be sufficient during sport, drinking to thirst.
Okay. With respect to nutrition, I'd love to hear your thoughts. I think based on a few factors, that probably a lot of the people that are absorbing this content have some form of low carbohydrate diet, but certainly not entirely. I know there's a mix of people with different dietary patterns, but I do relatively low carb, so I'm also interested in any thoughts on that particular element, but no limits. Just any thoughts you have on how you should fuel yourself for training and for a race.
Yeah, for sure. So, I'm not really I won't give recommendations on just what to eat like on a day-to-day basis, because that's just going to depend on your personal preferences and what percent your excuse me, what you want your macronutrient percentages to be and things like that, which are, you know, highly individual. Obviously the main thing is going to be that if you're increasing your activity and increasing your mileage, unless your goal is to specifically lose a lot of weight, you know, you will lose some weight, I think, regardless maybe of how much you eat as you start to increase your mileage. You know, that may be a controversial topic to some people, but, you know, if you're going from couch to literally training for a half marathon, it's likely that you'll lose a little bit of weight just naturally. But I think that just eating enough, first of all, first and foremost, to maintain sort of the ability to train and maintain your energy levels and sort of repair the protein breakdown that's going and replenishing your glycogen on a day-to-day basis is important. And again, replenishing glycogen doesn't mean that you need to load up with a plate of carbohydrates. Even on a low carb diet, you know, if you're just training once every single day, your glycogen has enough time to replenish between one training session to the next. And you're likely not depleting your glycogen fully unless you're really increasing your volume to like a very high level during the week. So I think that, you know, if someone were on a low carb diet, such as yourself, clearly as yourself and others have proven, and I don't think that this is that controversial, that obviously one can train for and run a half marathon fine on a low carbohydrate diet. And half marathon and above, I think, are distances that could, I wouldn't say benefit more from low carb than say a higher carb diet, but I think the maybe performance might be equal in terms of how they could affect performance. So it's more than feasible. You know, at the 13-mile distance, the intensity could be low enough so much that you're, you know, able to fuel yourself during a race sufficiently on sort of a low carbohydrate diet. I think just some general training or nutrition principles that people can utilize. I'll talk about maybe training first and then race day. Some people like eating before runs, some people don't. I think that you could do either. And what I would recommend is that if you prefer fasted training, if you do your training in the morning and like to run fasted, maybe even in the afternoon fasted after kind of a more extended fast, then you can do that just fine. I do all of my morning workouts at least fasted, and sometimes those are, you know, two plus hours. But I would recommend for maybe your longer session of the week or your harder session to consider experimenting with eating something, to train your stomach to be able to run with something in it, because come race day, the recommendation would be to probably have like a pre-race meal, because I think that that could help to kind of boost your performance above and beyond what it could be otherwise if you went out and ran your half marathon race fasted. So I would recommend, say maybe, you know, say you do your 2 runs earlier in the week, just fasted, that's completely fine. Do your long run on the weekend, maybe have a pre-race or a pre-run meal. That might include a little bit of carbohydrate, but it could also maybe just be, say, fat-based, maybe having some nut butter or, you know, a banana if you like that and some nut butter. Some people are against bananas. So again, all of this is just going to depend on what you like to eat, what your stomach can handle well. Typically though, something that's, you know, not super heavy in fiber or super heavy really in protein. Protein is not going to play much of a role in terms of fueling your exercise. So more than maybe 10 to 15 grams in kind of that pre-race meal, I find to be kind of not great on the stomach, just because your body's going to be working to digest that when it needs to focus on other things like fueling your muscles and diverting blood flow elsewhere other than your stomach. So I would say experiment once a week with eating something before or during one of your training runs. And then during the training run, again, that could mean maybe you're just having some nut butter, maybe you're having a banana, maybe you're having a gel, something like that. Maybe you're just having another piece of fruit that you enjoy. I think that could help, again, one, to increase your performance on that run, maybe help you feel a little bit better by increasing sort of your glycogen availability, your glucose, blood glucose during that run, maintaining those levels. And then also training your stomach, because you don't want to run all your runs fasted during your training program. And then on race day, say, okay, I'm going to have breakfast. That's kind of a disaster waiting to happen. And I'm sure some people maybe have experienced that before. That gets down to sort of don't try anything new on race day. So if you haven't eaten anything before your runs, if on race day comes and you still haven't, I would say continue that. But that's why I recommend experimenting sort of with that nutrition. And then as far as race day nutrition goes, you know, you have pre-race and then during race. So pre-race, I would recommend like a light breakfast, you know, something that's maybe, I don't know, 500, 600 calories, maybe. It could even be more. Maybe some people have kind of iron stomachs. They can eat whatever the heck they want before a race. I typically find that what worked for me or works for me is something like an energy bar, or maybe like a piece of whole wheat toast with some peanut butter and a banana. Very easy on my stomach, kind of the optimal macronutrient kind of composition. And I find that helps me kind of perform well during the race. But again, you could eat anything, fruit, but just something light, something that's easily digestible. And I would, try to consume that 90 minutes to 3 hours kind of before, just to give it enough time to digest and settle in your stomach. And then during the race, again, this is obviously more technically difficult because some races will provide gels and things like that on the course. Many do not, especially if it's just a half marathon. They're not going to give you, say, gels during the race, or have kind of stations where they'll have food. So consider maybe bringing along your own snacks, whether that's in like a fanny pack or like a waist pack or something like that. And for that, I would recommend something like, if people aren't opposed to it, one of those gels, and you don't even have to eat the whole thing. Maybe just take a few, it's not really a sip since it's a gel, I don't know what you would call it, but a bite of your gel or two during the race. You could just use one throughout the whole race. And that's just going to sort of, again, keep your sort of glucose level stable, give you honestly a mental boost. Just kind of having that sensation of something, food, whether it be a sweetness or a carbohydrate type of thing in your mouth, can sort of just be an important like signaling thing to tell your body, oh, we got some energy and, we're good to go. So, gels and things like that, they can make already made, pretty convenient, and people can have those out on the course, rip it open, take it down, and then even just toss it to the side of the road or put it in your pocket. So those are all good things to eat during a race, or something like a piece of fruit. But again, I'm not sure anybody wants to like carry a piece of fruit out there on the race course. So that's why those gels are so good. Either gels or sort of a sports drink that contains maybe a tiny amount of some sort of carbohydrate is going to be good to have during the race.
Any considerations for the things that you are wearing on your feet, like socks and shoes? Anything that you should look for when you're going to, if you don't have a lot of experience with this? I know that there's probably lots of businesses out there that are more than willing to take huge amounts of your money. How much money should you be looking to spend, and what things are necessary and what things are maybe frivolous?
Yeah. You're completely right about, and there are so many shoe brands out there and different shoe technologies and people telling you should wear this and you should wear that. So the best investment, we talked about gear earlier, but the best investment, if somebody's going to sign up for a half marathon, treat yourself to like a nice new pair of running shoes and plan on spending anywhere from $100 to $150. You're not going to get a good pair of running shoes for under $100. So I just plan to spend that much, but it's an investment that's, clearly worth making and can often be a very good source of motivation. Whenever I buy a new pair of shoes, I'm always like, even if I've already run that day, I'm like, oh, I gotta, go happy or go out there and run in these shoes and break them in and get in a second run. But so as far as what type of shoe to buy, and I actually had an interesting conversation on my podcast with Dr. Heather Vincent, who is an orthopedic and a sports medicine specialist here in the Gainesville area. She runs a lab where they do gait analyses and things like that. So I talked to her, and obviously this was a question my listeners had for her, what type of shoes should I buy? How should I select footwear? Basically her recommendations, and I think these are pretty solid and sort of general recommendations. Find something that, yes, has a little bit of support, a little bit of cushion, that's comfortable, but ultimately you want to find something that is flexible, that allows your foot to move naturally. And essentially, what that means is, no, you don't really need a sort of stability shoe or something that's going to correct, quote unquote, correct sort of these foot movements that people may have been told that they need. Sort of, maybe you're a overpronator or an oversupinator, so you need a shoe with like a arch support or something like that. Generally, her recommendations and those of others are to find something that is flexible, allows your foot to move naturally. And when you go online or in a store to look at a running shoe, that's typically going to go by the name of a quote neutral shoe. So if you go online and to say a running shoe store online, look for a shoe that says neutral. And that is kind of what, I think most people will find comfortable running in, and that's going to say help prevent injuries, but also provide enough cushion that it's going to sort of, prevent maybe their feet, them from having foot pain and things like that. So I liked her recommendation, and I thought that it was very balanced. Again, I'm not an expert sort of in foot biomechanics or shoes, and so I'm never going to say recommend a specific brand or a type of shoe to somebody. First of all, because I don't think that there is a quote best brand. There's a best brand for someone. So when people ask me what type of shoe should I wear, I'll tell them what I wear. I wear the Nike Pegasus 29. I've been wearing the Nike Pegasus running shoe for, since I was, I think, a freshman in undergrad. So when I started kind of running collegiately, I ran in the Nike Pegasus, and it's just a perfectly kind of neutral, general shoe. It's light, it's fast, it's cushiony, and I love it. So, people are free to try that one out. But again, just looking for a neutral shoe, and I think is going to be kind of the key for everyone. And all these different shoe technologies and different gizmos and things like that these shoe companies are kind of putting out there. Yes, they might look nice and kind of feel nice, but ultimately I don't think that they're that important. So just find something that you like. Really.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
And that leads me to a question. How many miles can you expect to get out of a shoe? And also, how many miles should you have already worn that shoe before race day?
Yeah, great question. In terms of, I think, the lifetime kind of mileage of a shoe, I would say 500 to 600 miles probably. So depending on how much you're running, that could be, anywhere from 6 months to a year. It's funny when I was running collegiately and putting in, 90 to 100 mile weeks, I was going through a pair of shoes, every month. So for a college student too, that can be a kind of a pricey endeavor. We only got one free pair of shoes each year, so I had to buy the rest of mine. But anyway, I would say 500 to 600 miles, 500 to maybe to 700 for a little bit wider of a range. That obviously requires that people either track exactly how many miles are on your shoes, or just calculate, if I run 30 miles per week for X months, then my shoes should be ready for a renewal by then. I would say either or. So there's kind of a mileage or a time when you should get rid of your shoes. So whichever comes first, reach 500, 700 miles, or I'd say maybe if you've had a shoe for over a year, throw it out and get a new one, because the materials in the shoe actually do just degrade over time. So even if your shoe's sitting there or whatever for a certain amount of time, it sort of loses its, I don't know what a correct shoe terminology there would be, but it loses some of what it's got. It loses some of its give. So most people will kind of hit maybe that mileage before then. So I would just recommend keep them for a year, or keep them for 500, 700 miles. A very cool feature of the Strava app is that you can add gear. So if you download the Strava app, you can go to your profile on the web app and you can add a pair of shoes. And then every time you run, it automatically adds your miles to those shoes, and it'll actually send you an alert. You can say, alert me when this shoe has reached X number of miles, and it'll send you an alert saying, hey, time for a new pair of shoes. So that's it's kind of a cool feature that Strava has built in there. I typically just click it and say, I can't afford shoes right now. Remind me later, but yeah. So yeah, that's kind of the recommendation. You'll hear different numbers from everybody, but I've heard 500 to 700 for multiple sources. So that's kind of the general recommendation there.
Okay. And how much should the shoes be broken in before race day?
Yeah. I would say you should probably wear them for, I want to say a couple runs, but at least I would say, a minimum of a month, running that shoe for at least a month. Don't wear them for the first time on race day. Do not do that, because you will get blisters and it will be painful, and it will not be fun. I've probably only done this once or twice, wearing a pair of, say, brand new racing flats that I bought on race day for the first time. I didn't necessarily have, the worst time in it, and it was fine. But again, you don't want to wear your shoes for the first time on race day. So at least get a couple weeks of running out of them before you put them on race day. And some people, Chris, will choose to have a specific shoe for training and a specific shoe for racing. I'm sure you're well aware of those, spiffy new carbon fiber plate shoes that are out there. Pretty much every running company has them now. Nike is sort of the first to have them out, but all the companies sort of have a carbon fiber running and racing shoe now. So if you're someone who can afford that and wants to, say, have a specific pair of racing shoes, still run in those shoes a couple of times before race day. So training your normal trainers, and maybe do a couple of your long runs in your shoe that you plan to race in before race day.
Okay, great. Now, I'm going to share links to your training programs. I think that they're available through your Patreon.
I think that they are, yes. And I will kind of make sure that they are all up there or at least accessible kind of before this comes out. And if I put anything else up there, I will I'll let you know, but I'll try to post some resources and things on my Patreon, and maybe I can, send them to you if people want to look those up. But I know I have like a 5K sort of template training plan, but people are more than welcome, if they want to set up, say, like a 15-minute, 20-minute, whatever call with me through like my website. I can give you a link to that too. And, I can sort of just provide them, whether they want this ready-made plan, just individually tailored or whatever. I'm also, kind of free to chat, because the ready-made plans, they work well, but I think the best thing is to at least, have somebody give you something after they understand kind of what your weekly time constraints and things like that are.
And it's correct that you are available for consultations on a more elaborate basis for those who can budget for that and who have the need. Is that correct?
Yeah, correct. So, and again, I have to make sure that this is there on my website, but by the time you post anything, I'll make sure to have that. But if people can post, I do 15 to say like a 30-minute consult call. That's just anything like, that runs like $15, and that can just be like an introduction session, or, that could even be enough time for me just to say, oh, this is what you want, this is what you need, and throw something together and provide somebody a training plan. I also offer services for anybody who's interested. If they were interested in doing coaching on a month-to-month basis, where you actually get kind of, weekly or monthly check-in calls, and things like that, they're able to sort of schedule that with me. But reaching out to me first, just through the website or even through something like social media, could be the first step. And then I'm more than happy to work with people who want, any level sort of depth for their training program.
Can you just very basically, to give an idea to people what it would look like to train for that half marathon? You kind of went into it earlier in this conversation, but say I was going to give, for starters, 3 days a week, and I'm open to the idea of going as long as you suggest for the long run. How would you break it down? Like just a quick overview on what day 1, day 2, and day 3 is for me. And then of course, everybody understands that, different time constraints, maybe different goals are going to result in different actual prescriptions.
Yeah, absolutely. So a general framework, and again, this can kind of be infinitely modified just by sort of multiplying maybe the daily mileage or the daily time run by whatever factor you're willing to kind of do. So for you, and this is kind of what your 5K kind of framework was. So I'll, provide a similar framework, but let's say 3 days per week. And let's say, Chris, you wanted to run, say 25 miles per week, maybe something like that. We'll maybe put that level of kind of weekly mileage out there. So Monday, I would have an easy run between 4 and 6, maybe even 4 to 7 miles. So, and by easy, I mean, we're either going to prescribe that by heart rate, maybe 60 to 70%, or just go out there conversational pace. Go out with your wife, run, have a conversational pace, keep it easy, and just enjoy it. That's going to be kind of your aerobic base run. Wednesday is typically going to be something a little bit harder, and then this can progress from anywhere just a more up-tempo run to an actual structured interval workout. And, you could have a whole discussion on interval workouts, so I kind of won't get into that, but let's just call Wednesday a higher intensity day. We won't discuss specifics on what that means. So for you, maybe we'll say that might mean a threshold or a tempo paced run. So we're going to maybe do a 20-minute easy run for a quote warm up, and then we're maybe going to run 20 minutes hard. So something at a threshold pace where you can't really hold a conversation. And then we're going to do another maybe 10 to 20 minutes for a cool down. So another 20 minutes easy at the end of that. You could also maybe just do a 30 to 40-minute run where you're feeling like it's hard the entire time. You can't really hold a conversation. So something that just gets your heart rate pumping a little bit, harder than normal, to get that higher intensity day in there. So total for the day, maybe you'll get another 6 to 7 miles in there, perhaps. And then Saturday or Sunday, our third day of the week, is our long run day. And again, this is going to be easy because the goal of this run is just to get time on your feet, to build that cardiovascular, that aerobic base. But also, like I mentioned earlier, it's obviously about building the aerobic base, your heart and your lungs, cardiorespiratory system, but also your musculoskeletal system, being able to tolerate being running and on your feet for 2.5, 3 hours. So Saturday, Sunday, long run. Some people like doing it on Saturday, some on Sunday, sort of religions on whether one should do it on Saturday or Sunday. But I would say then that will be anywhere from 9 to 11, 12, even 13 miles. And I think that brings up, kind of one more point on that, is that I think before race day, you don't necessarily need to do a run that's 13 miles or above. If you can, and if that's within someone's capacity and willingness, sure, go ahead and run 14, 15, 16, because I think, if you do 15 during training, Chris, you're going to go into race day thinking, oh, I can for sure finish because I've run 15 before. So now I'm able to run 13 a little bit faster. So I think that is something that one could do, but I don't think that one necessarily needs to be able, have run 13 in training to be successful on race day. But I would say at the bare minimum, probably have run maybe 10 or 11 miles during training. And we'll obviously build up that weekend long run as the training program progresses. But regardless of the length or distance or whatever, Sunday, Saturday's the weekly long run. And again, try to get around a third to maybe even a half of your weekly mileage in that run. So basically long run on the weekend might be the sum of, say, Monday and Wednesday, or day 1 and 2's run combined, or maybe a little bit under that.
Okay, thank you for providing that. I have a question about where the gains are coming from over time. Like if I'm doing these 3 runs that you suggested and I'm doing them consistently, where am I pushing? Like on those long runs, you're saying to run at an easy pace. Is the speed going to pick up a little bit over time as I get fitter and better at this, or is the improvement my ability to potentially run a half marathon at a faster pace? Is it coming more from the tempo day, or what's going on in my body and causing me to get faster over a half marathon?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the correct answer is basically all of those runs are helping, but just in these different ways. So, I'm sure people have heard a lot about zone 2 training, and others, people other than myself has discussed all the benefits of that. But when you're doing these very easy runs, and as far as your kind of aerobic energy production systems go, you're training your mitochondria just to be more efficient at utilizing fuel for energy. You're building your mitochondrial capacity. So you're literally building sort of, creating new mitochondria. You're helping your blood vessels pump blood more efficiently. So all of that base training is kind of what is accomplishing that. So they call it basically building your aerobic base. Your body is obviously just becoming stronger and the muscles are becoming more stronger, but your, say, type 1, your oxidative fibers, and then your mitochondria are actually just becoming more efficient. In terms of where your speed or your ability to hold on to a faster pace for longer, that's going to come, yes, from the benefits that you're getting from those zone 2 runs, just because you're going to be fitter. But pushing those upper zones, say pushing at your higher percent of your VO2 max or even your VO2 max, is actually what's going to sort of push your ceiling up a little bit more. So if you push that ceiling up, everything kind of below that, all those paces become subjectively and objectively easier. So if you are, training at this high intensity on Wednesday, that's kind of where you're going to become more efficient at faster paces. So say you're running a 8-minute mile and your heart rate is 85% of your max when you're at an 8-minute mile. Well, if you train at a faster pace of your 8-minute mile, or you train at that 8-minute mile by doing those threshold runs, or like for you, we had you doing mile repeats and things like that, then eventually you're going to run that 8-minute mile and you're going to be at 75 or 80% of your maximal heart rate. So then we can run at a faster pace at 85% of your, so when you go at a higher intensity, you're able to run now a 7:30 mile. And sort of that's where you're pushing your upper threshold. So in terms of, running fast you're going to get your benefits from that Wednesday run. But then in terms of, running far and fast, because again, all the runs help contribute overall to like you just getting more efficient at running. All those runs are definitely going to help.
I hear a lot of talk about criticism for people running too fast in their training. And I just want to get at the reason for that, and how much of a concern is it? I mean, certainly I want to I want to optimize the time that I'm putting into this. I'm not necessarily able to say I want to optimize my results 100%, because that would involve me committing more time than I probably have. But I do want to get the most efficient return on my investment of time. And I'm just curious about like, what is the downside to me if I accidentally perhaps run a little too fast on those distance runs? If you tell me to run 12 miles at 60% of my capacity, and I make the mistake of running at 67% of my capacity, what happens? What's the downside?
Yeah, so that's a really great question, because you do see just a lot of people and I've even seen people get on you on Twitter about this. So Chris, you're running your runs too fast or whatever. So I think the important thing to talk about here is that you see a lot of people will talk about sort of this 80-20 principle in running, where 80% of your stuff should be real easy and 20 of it should be high intensity. You can't really go hard on all of your runs. I think what people first need to realize is that a lot of these recommendations come from things that were learned from elite athletes who are often training, 15 to 20 hours per week. If you're training 15 to 20 hours per week, yeah, all your volume cannot be high intensity. A lot of it needs to be easy. You're training 20 hours per week. Yeah, you should probably be doing 15 of those hours at a very, very low intensity, and then the rest of those 5 hours at a very high intensity. But if we're then going down to, someone who just wants to put in 2 to 3 hours per week, yeah, I think you should be doing some easy running. But I think, you make a good point in that, Chris, you're trying to get as much out of your training as possible. That doesn't mean you need to go all out on every run. I don't think that is sustainable. Clearly not. But I do not think, and again, this is my personal opinion, but I don't think that there is as much of a risk. As the volume goes down, there's much less of a risk of overdoing it, quote unquote, overdoing it on the intensity if your volume is on kind of the lower end. And I think it could overall be more beneficial, because, like you said, you're going to kind of get more out of that training run going out a little bit higher of an intensity. If you're going out for 3 jogs during the week, you might not get as good as you want to be, because you're doing, 3 hours of running a week, but it's all maybe too low intensity. So there's not enough of a stimulus. So I think that the benefit to risk ratio is less in, say, let's just use you as an example, doing those 3 runs per week. One, because in between those runs, you're getting a full day of recovery. So after all of your runs, you're getting a complete off day. Again, something else to pull from the elite athletes who are literally training 7 days per week. So instead of your off day, you need to have a day that is extremely low intensity so you can recover before your next session, because they're often doing a hard session, easy day, hard session, easy day, hard session, easy day. But with somebody who's going to do a program like the one that we're discussing, they're having 2 easy days per week and maybe a hard day per week. So I think that pushing maybe up into that moderate range, of the low to moderate range on those runs, it's not necessarily going to be that detrimental in my opinion. Now, if you have a week or 2 where you really overdo it, you might start to feel some symptoms of that. And I think that can be a call to say, maybe take it very, very easy on one of your days. Maybe go for a walk instead. I think the body gives pretty good feedback in terms of if you're overdoing it. So I really don't think that people should be as scared as saying, oh my gosh, like you said, oh my gosh, I was at 67% of my heart rate max on this run versus, 65, or I got out of zone 2. I'm so concerned I have to stay in zone 2. I don't think, people need to be as worried about that if you are training at a level that is 3, even 4 days per week, where you're getting a sufficient number of these kind of recovery days in between.
Okay, that's a great answer, and it answers a lot. I really I knew that this is probably coming from athletes who are training at a higher level than I'm training at. And I think it's an important distinction because that same type of thing goes on with respect to resistance training. And it also goes on with respect to diet. Like people say that you can't do a low carb diet. It's a lot different for somebody like myself who used to be obese and has some concerns about regaining that obesity compared with somebody that's training for a spot on the Olympic team or even a Division I athlete or something. It's like, that's a different world from the one that I live in. So some of our, we just have to acknowledge that concerns for certain things are different based on the individual. And thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah, and I think that's where a lot of the lack of the nuance on social media comes from. Chris, like people are just throwing out recommendations, whether it's on nutrition or training or whatever. And it's like, well, yeah, in Olympians or in, professional track and field athletes or professional marathoners, this applies. But like, you have to separate the population that you're talking about before recommendations. And oftentimes people, myself included, often kind of fail to recognize that. So
a couple more real quick questions.
Sure.
I am a person who goes to the place where I'm going to start my runs, and I generally start running, usually relatively slowly at first, to warm up. I don't do any sort of stretching. Is that a mistake?
No, I don't think so, especially not before the run. So stretching is kind of a controversial area as well, but I think that the general consensus is that static stretching before a run is kind of a no-no. If anything, it might be detrimental to running performance because, without getting too much into detail, there's, all of our muscles have kind of an optimal length where they're working properly, the optimal stretch where it can produce the maximal amount of tension and rate of force development. If you stretch a muscle out too much, it's going to reduce that ability to produce force and produce tension. So you want your muscles to be like a spring. You don't want it to be like a loose rope. So I know that maybe is a poor analogy for a muscle, but regardless, static stretching, meaning basically you're just holding a stretch for 15 to 30 seconds or more before a run. Don't really do it unless you really have something that's bothering you that might need to be stretched out. So I'd say before a run, you're completely fine not stretching, but I would do some type of a dynamic warm up. So, you could Google something or look on YouTube. I know Zach Bitter has some good just sort of short tutorials and things like that he posts on Instagram of here's my pre-run warm-up. He'll do some lunges, he'll do some maybe high knee type of stuff, but dynamic being that you're moving while you're stretching just to loosen up the joints, get the muscles warm before you start running. Again, that can be ideal, but not required. Like you, I typically I'll do a few warm-up drills and things like that, but just run your first mile a lot slower, ease into the run, and you'll be fine and kind of at a low risk of injury. And then after the run, perhaps this is where you were going, but I also don't think that stretching is necessary. But again, if something is bothering you or something's nagging, go ahead and stretch it. Maybe use a foam roller or recovery. But in general, unless it's a very hard run, do some type of cool down for a walk, but you're probably, going to be fine. I think that there's not a lot of evidence that stretching has been shown to sort of reduce injuries. And, some people may disagree with me on that, but I personally, haven't found stretching to be that useful unless there's, really something that needs to be stretched. So dynamic warm up before exercise, maybe a cool down stretch afterwards, just hold some different positions for a little bit, loosen out the hips before you get into your car or wherever to go home. And that should be sufficient. And I think that post-run stretch for 5 to 10 minutes could also just be a good time to sort of relax mentally and sort of cool down not only your your muscular system, but also kind of your sympathetic system after you've just engaged in a run.
Okay, and I think just curious about any thoughts that you might have about what someone chooses to listen to or not listen to while they train and while they race. You have any sort of thoughts about what might be best, or is it totally an individual preference type of thing? What do you think about that?
Yeah, definitely a preference type thing. There are also many schools of thought around this, and people think, oh, you shouldn't run with headphones, or you should. Personally, and others like me, I like to typically listen to a podcast or something like an audiobook while I run, maybe because I'm like a multitasker, but I also find that it just sort of sometimes takes my mind away from the run. Sometimes I'm trying to dissociate from the run rather than associate. I just want to get the miles in and get home. But I also, I want to listen to something interesting while I run. And I also, I find that I retain information better if I'm listening to it on a run, because I can't multitask and do any other weird stuff while I'm running. It's just me and like whatever I'm listening to. So I like audiobooks. If it's a faster run or I need some motivation, I will put on some music. I have like a running playlist that I'll just add songs to in my Apple Music, and then put on that playlist during the run. And those songs kind of are pump up songs and whatever, but sometimes you don't want to be pumped up. And maybe if you need an easy run, you have songs that are sort of easy and maybe lighter. So that kind of just depends on the goal of the run, but I'm not against listening to music during a run. And I often find that it can be pretty helpful, both as kind of a performance enhancing quote tool, but also to maybe help you dial back. So, kind of play with the different intensities and types of music, for that to kind of suit your needs. I wouldn't do it for every run. So I mentioned how it could be used as a tool. And I really think a tool is a good kind of metaphor for that, in terms of, oh, I need extra motivation this day, I'm going to pop some music in, but don't maybe use it every day. Maybe, stress yourself once per week and go out without any headphones or without any podcasts. I think that can be beneficial too, because ultimately as a runner, you want to learn feedback and hear and listen to feedback from your breathing, from your foot strikes, and none of that you can really do if you have headphones in. So I think it's valuable on occasion to just be with your own thoughts and, listen to your own body during training. And during racing though, I would completely advise against putting any sort of headphones or music or podcast in. One, many races don't even allow it. Many races kind of prohibit headphones, which I think is a great rule to have. But secondly, again, one, you don't want to get caught up in, say, if you're listening to music on race day and go out too fast. That's very likely to happen. I sure as heck would go out way too fast if I had like a song playing in my ears at the beginning of a race. Also, just it's time to enjoy the race and sort of involve with the camaraderie around you, as well as sort of like the race environment. I just think that headphones can take away from that. So I would really, really strongly advise, and I think most people kind of share that opinion, of using anything like that on race day. Kind of just, it's not only rude, but I think it can kind of take away from the experience.
Great. While we're talking about music, is there like a song that you have on your list that is like a complete one that'll raise your pace and
yeah. So I have like two songs that typically when they come on, I will like run a lot faster. What my kind of genre of preference is like rap and hip hop when I'm running, just because of the cadence, and that's typically what I listen to anyway. But if Lose Yourself by Eminem comes on, that's typically a song where I'll run way too fast during it. But also what I find too, something interesting, and people can, I'm sure there's websites where you can look this up, but you can look at the beats per minute or the cadence of a song and sort of tailor that to maybe what you want to run in terms of like, say 170 to 180 steps per minute. There are a lot of songs that have that rhythm, and then you can kind of run to the cadence of the song. And one of the ones that I find for me is Into Club by 50 Cent. That actually has like the perfect cadence for me to run. So whenever that one comes on, I'm always, kind of in sync with that song when I'm running.
That's very interesting. I Lose Yourself is on my list for both lifting and running.
Oh, nice.
But and I'll have to check out 50 Cent. But
yeah, that has good cadence too. I think Lose Yourself. I don't know what the cadence to that song is, but it's pretty in line with kind of a good running cadence.
It's funny. After I talked to Zach Bitter, he told me that Fred Bear was a song that he listened to, and I started listening to that after speaking with him. So I'm gonna.
Oh, fun.
I'll definitely put Lose Yourself on more often, and I'll check out 50 Cent.
Cool.
I think this was great, so educational. I would love to get your thoughts on some sort of a prescription. I'm pretty low maintenance. I will do, I think, what I'm told, and maybe do it. Like if you can tell me something to do for like the next few months, I'll just do it, and I'll be posting about it. And you're welcome to comment as you wish on Twitter in response or whatever, but I'll leave that to you.
Well, yeah, I'd be happy to put something together for you and for you to follow. And I have, no qualms that you'll follow it kind of to a T, just like you did the last one. But yeah, for sure. I'm happy to provide a template for you to follow, even though you sort of have one.